Okay, good morning to everyone. I think we can start. So thank you all for taking part in this meeting and in this initiative. So we are very happy to have so many distinguished guests around this virtual table. And first of all, thank you very much to Diplomacy Festival della Diplomazia for organizing this initiative together with the European Council on Foreign Relations. I'm Arturo Varvelli, the director of the Rome office or at the ECFR. So the roundtable is organized in a very crucial period for the discussion of the Libyan crisis, as there are several political initiatives for discussing the future of this country, with many actors involved and many negotiation tracks from Egypt to Morocco, from Switzerland to Tunisia. So diplomacies are at work. For example, yesterday evening, Fayez Sarraj was in Rome. So we know that a new negotiation process in Tunis will start in a few days, I think, and this negotiation should lead to the creation of a new presidential council. This is the aim, in the appointment of a prime minister, of a new prime minister and a new government, and then new election and drafting a constitution. So president and prime minister position currently converging in Sarraj will have to be double according to the majority of current interpretation in the construction of institutions which look like a sort of presidential system. There will be a tendency to give space to all the political and regional views of the country through a sort of new inclusive and shared path. So in the past year, Europe has been accused of becoming irrelevant to the Libyan crisis and allowing other actors, external actors, to enter the scene, from Turkey to Russia. So EU is accused of ineffectiveness if we look at the military operations in the water of the Mediterranean. For example, I'm talking about the Operation Irini. However, if we observe that the current political track is still very close to that outline at the Berlin conference in the last January, we can say that Europe as the EU, but also as single individual countries, can still have an important and perhaps decisive role in the negotiation. So yesterday, as I have already said, Sarraj was in Rome on what appears as a sort of last trip as president, but we certainly are not sure that the political transition will be short. And when we have been pessimistic in the past about Libya, we have always been right, unfortunately. So I think that despite political change in different talks, Libyans are not convinced that real change lies at their doorstep. So I think that the fear is the creation of another government that is not representative of the majority of the Libyan population. And the risk of creating the sort of Skira 2. But at the same time, it's true, for example, that in Morocco, 5+5 negotiation between participants from the government of national accord and from the House of Representatives found an agreement on the criteria to select heads of sovereign positions, so the leadership of the key institution in the country. But I would like to ask my friend and colleague Mattia Giampaolo to introduce the topic. Mattia is ECFR Pan-European Fellow and researcher at CESPI. Mattia, you have the floor. Mattia?
I see Mr. Giampaolo has disconnected.
Yes. Wow. Okay, so I think we can start from Michael Shaffer, because I think that we can introduce the topic of the economy. We can start from the topic of the economy. We know that Libya is a potentially very rich country, a rentier economy, and the issue related to the management and distribution of hydrocarbons revenues are a central topic in the solution of this crisis. One of the main divisive points in the negotiation is about the so-called sovereign position, which include the governor of the central bank of Libya. And this authority is a key in the national power share. The central bank pay public salaries across the country. And so the Skirat agreement in 2015 states that the parliament in Tobruk should nominate the head of the institution in consultation with the High State Council. However, the headquarters of this institution, of the central bank, is located in Tripoli, which is controlled by the GNA. And the consequences is that the Tripoli-based government, the General Accord, can potentially oppose to any House of Representatives nominated unwelcome names. So the issue relating to the distribution of the hydrocarbons revenues must necessarily be decided at the local level, at the Libyan level. However, I think European policymakers and international institutions can contribute to supporting the local negotiation. On this topic and on how, more in general, international institutions could support the economic development in Libya, I think that Michael Shaffer, country representative for Libya, World Bank, could give us some important consideration. So, Michael, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Mattia, sorry.
Mattia, we can start from the economy and
okay,
come back to you, okay?
Sorry.
I'd like to greet Mattia. I'm sorry, you were bumped. That's, I guess, show business. You know, the understudy comes in when the lead is out, but I'm sure you'll come back, and we look forward to hearing your discussion. My name is Michael Shaffer. I'm the country rep for the World Bank, and I've been working on Libya as a country rep for the last 2 to 3 years. And before that, I was working on Libya and the Middle East in terms of governance, public sector finance, and that's really the core element of my work now. It's also public finance, still is, okay? So where are we a little bit? And there's some differences of discussion, and I think I need to clarify as well. The World Bank has been engaged in Libya since, I think, 2008, 2009. And I myself have been in Libya since I actually had hair. I was there in 2006, 2007. Under a different process. It was with the UK DFID fund that I was a consultant at the time, and it was in Libya there. And so many of the same issues that are being discussed now in terms of decentralization and all these things really have some origins in 2006, 2007. I can go back to my papers at that point and say, wow, just read this, we're there. Now, the World Bank has been engaged in Libya since 2008, and we continue to be engaged. We have an office there, but we're really not there at the moment. The World Bank has been leading the efforts on the budget discussions and the financial transparency discussions. We were going to go to Rome to have additional budget meetings. We were in Rome in January, having budget meetings with East and West. We have an ongoing discussion with East and West. We're, I think, the only group until recently to have these technical meetings with East and West. We close the door. We have the discussions with the technical directors. We build a consolidated budget, and we come with a macro fiscal forecast. We were in Rome in January with the IMF having that discussion, and we were going to have our discussion now. We're like, because of COVID, we're like a Bedouin in the desert. We're trying to figure out where we're going to have the next meeting. It was going to be Rome, but you have issues in letting people in. Now it's going to be Switzerland, and now we're kind of organizing the Swiss, the UN, UNDP, whatever. It's become a complicated process, okay? So the international organizations like the World Bank have a very prominent role to play there. We've been providing guidance on social protection policy, public finance, fiscal policy. We're now, believe it or not, even at this very moment, having discussions on revising the chart of accounts, a unified chart of account structure, and pulling together the accountability structures for the government, okay? And we're having ongoing discussions, and sometimes I think some of the French ambassadors and the other ambassadors, the political ambassadors, realize in their discussions, it's almost like the World Bank and other institutions are like marriage counselors, okay? You have two sides that really are in love with each other, but occasionally they can't talk to each other. So you have to kind of be a marriage counselor and have these discussions. So we do that all the time. Now, where's I think Europe in this whole, and where's the international community in this? The UN, under the auspices of the UN and UNSMIL, there's joint technical committees and all these committees that are organized for international donor assistance. And we all fall under that. And for a while, this was really kind of very well structured with different streams, like the economic recovery stream, which the World Bank is co-leading with the Ministry of Planning. There's a social protection scheme, which UNICEF is leading with Social Protection Institute in Libya. And there's a governance team, which UNDP and USAID are co-leading with the Ministry of Planning. So all of the technical assistance comes under those three streams, okay? But in the past 3 years, I mean, in my opinion, and on this one, I don't know who's, I hope there's no press here, but in my opinion, okay, it's like these things have not been as tightly coordinated as they once were, okay? So I think what's been happening is we're like, it's trying to round up kittens. You know, little kittens want to go all over the place, and we're all cute little international kittens, but trying to get everybody to synchronize has been very difficult, okay? But there's been a role for the international community, specifically Europe. I mean, recently we've had, I think the French have been involved, and we've had discussions with the French in different ways on how the World Bank can use its comparative advantage on public finance and that kind of stuff. We've had discussions with the Germans. We fit under them in terms of the discussions with the decentralization, et cetera. The question is, or not the question, but the issue is that as everyone in this room knows, that the last 3 years has become a proxy war, okay? So there's a lot of players involved there, and everybody's allegiances and going on there, and there are a lot of political dynamics. And the Libyans are almost like a bit player, a small role player in all of this, because the international community is playing a much more substantial role. Certainly the French are, the Turks are, the Russians are too, which is completely very interesting that they're playing a very dominant role. And so it's very difficult to get an across-the-board agreement, because it really requires very strong international support and collaboration by the entire community. And as you know, okay, from reading the press and from understanding what's going on there, that even within NATO, there seems to be a disagreement. I mean, when the French and the Turkish have disagreements within NATO, it becomes very, very problematic, okay? So if we don't have international coordination on this, then you're gonna have very little domestic coordination on this, okay? And I think it shows that to me, it shows that there's a very substantial role for the international community to play, but they have to come to some sort of agreement as how they want to proceed to go forward. The Berlin process, under which the French, the US, the Egyptians, everybody else is falling under, seems to be making progress. We were last night till fairly late in the evening discussing with the IMF. The Egyptians were on the line, the Americans were online, the US Treasury was online, discussing potential things for on the economic side, which way to proceed, okay? And the Libyans will present that to this larger coordinating committee, and it will be actually presented again to the LPDF, which is the Libyan Policy Dynamic Forum, which is going to occur, I think, in early November, okay? So there's a whole kind of structure to go forward in terms of political discussions and political dynamics. But again, some of this is very difficult because you still have the two sides there. I don't know how many people have worked in Libya. I see a lot of young people in the screen, so I'm not sure that many of these young people have, my God, you guys are all looking so young. So I'm not sure if you've been to Libya or in this kind of environment, but we have a lot of these discussions, like I said, with the East and the West. We've had them for years. And in our policy dialogue, I mean, the first day, the first few hours is people airing out their dirty laundry and discussing it with each other. And Quite frankly, sometimes I'd rather be in another place than listen to this, okay? But they have to get out their grievances. So we've worked with them in the past to accelerate wage payments, both East and West. We worked with them to reduce the food subsidy in 2014, the food subsidy, okay, that was just completely taken off the table. And we had agreement in Istanbul, Turkey at the time to do it. Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty issues, okay? We have budget deficits that are approaching record numbers. I think it's 52% deficit to GDP ratio forecast this year. I mean, they're setting world records in this, okay? And the debt to GDP ratio, according to the Central Bank of Libya in Tripoli, is 260% of GDP, okay? Now, that just incorporates the debt that the Central Bank of Tripoli has. It doesn't incorporate the debt that's being accumulated from the East, okay? So I have to go back, and I know that people are talking about the Libyan balance sheet, the wealth of the Libyan economy, but I quite frankly don't see it like that anymore. I see domestic debt somewhere around 120 to 140 billion of Libyan dinar of domestic debt. That does not include the 160 billion in legacy projects that are owed to international community, okay? That does not incorporate all the projects that need to be built going forward. So I don't quite see it as kind of like a wealthy country. I see it as they've already spent down a lot of that wealth. Now, everybody keeps monitoring the foreign exchange reserves. The foreign exchange reserves have collapsed from, not collapsed, that's too strong, have declined from 140 billion, I think, in 2014 to roughly, depending on whose numbers, we can always blame the IMF for this because I'm going to use their forecast, to 49 billion or 52 billion foreign exchange reserves this year, okay? So they've really come down, okay? So it complicates the problem because the cupboards are bare. You know, when you go to the closet, you go like, what food is available? It's really a lot more stressful there. So then you have to say, okay, you're not as wealthy as you assume. You do need stronger readjustments in, you need budget consolidation, you need budget prioritization, and all these kinds of things. So as I conclude, and I know that we have to move on to Mattia, I'm not trying to take up your space here. We're working with World Food Program in doing work on social protection analysis. So we're gathering data for that now, okay? And also with UNICEF on that so we can assist in the social protection program. But how can you do social protection and subsidy reform in the middle of a conflict with two government structure? Very difficult. We're working with the East and West on fiscal reform, fiscal stabilization, and transparency, you know, and that's also difficult. But I want to tell everybody that's listening, every younger person in this audience here, that both the East and the West have basically said they want one financial management system and they want one consolidated chart of accounts, which, you know, I'm dumbstruck with that. I said, you know, what's going on here? And then you have the bigger problem of conflicting bigger issues. But on the technical side, everybody wants a unified structure, okay? And so I think this really, I'm going back a little bit, but before I conclude, I just want to say that the international community plays a very prominent role. The French have been involved in this for a long time. The Egyptians are now playing a role in the Berlin process, the Americans are, and also the Europeans are playing a role in the Libyan economic dialogues with the Libyan Economic Committee. I think they're making progress. Okay, but sometimes you can say, I think there's an expression, it's deja vu all over again. So we have to kind of keep pushing this process going forward, and it takes one strategic direction by the international community. Anyway, I'm going to turn it off, leave it to all the younger people there, and then Matteo, I didn't mean to take over your spot. Good luck to you on your presentation. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you very much, Michael. We know that as long as the economic institutions are unitary, there will be hope of having a united Libya. So Michael Shaffer introduced the economic issues very well, but he also talked about proxy war, touching one of the main points of the Libyan crisis. With Mattia, we can start from this point, that is from the divergence within the international community, but often also within the EU. Mattia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry for the technical problems. My laptop got crazy today. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I want to thank the organization and the ECFR's director Arturo Barbelli for involving me. I'm Mattia Giampaolo. I'm a researcher fellow at CESPI and pan-European fellow at ECFR. Well, we are witnessing to a really thick moves on Libyan crisis in these last months, with varied tracks in terms of talks among regional international actors and a starting process within Libyan political actors. We have the Morocco's track, which is attempting to the rebuilding of the Libyan institutions by promoting a dialogue between West and Eastern Libya. We have Cairo Path, sponsored by Egypt, that is putting at the core of the talks the figure of Aguila Saleh, the president of Tobruk House of Representatives, at the expense, in some ways, of the General Khalifa Haftar, who sponsored since the beginning of the rise of the general in the country. And finally, we have the Geneva track that is shifting to Tunis in these last days, which aims at the unifying of the armed forces and led by the UN and international leadership. Within this big, huge scenario, Europe seems, as Arturo said, in some ways, to be sidelined by the role of the regional and international powers. So before to jump on the reasons of Europe's sidelined role in Libya, it is important, in my opinion, to give you a very quick overview of what happened in these last 2 years and how we have reached this situation in Libya. Well, I should start to Haftar offensive on Tripoli. The offensive of the general of Cyrenaica had the aim to put under his control the war country, sign the revival of international actors within the Libyan transition from the post-Gaddafi downfall. The general, since the start of his attack on the capital, has been sponsored by various actors in the region, firstly UAE, Egypt, and partly Saudi Arabia. On the other side, I mean the GNA side, at least at the beginning, his support was just from the city of Misurata, or the city-state of Misurata and its armed forces. Despite the deteriorating situation of the crisis, especially after the Haftar offensive, Europe states and Europe in general did not express explicit concern on the situation. Italy, for example, is the main actor that has a huge interest in the country, remained silenced. For example, after Haftar bombs the neighborhood of its hospital in Misurata, for example. The silence triggered the rage of GNA, which Italy sustained and in some ways created in 2015. This silence gave the start to Italy capitulation in Libya, for example. Europe as well, with its different view on the crisis resolution among member states, was not able to make any decision on what was going on in Libya and how to resolve the situation. Before the international community mobilism, things changed with the Turkish intervention in support of GNA in December 2019. The signature of the Memorandum of Understanding on Maritime Borders that enlarged de facto and partly de jure the conflict to the East Mediterranean gave at the same time GNA a military support, what it asked for a long time, in defense from drones or attack on UAE and Khalifa Haftar LNA, Libyan National Army. The military intervention of Turkey represented a U-turn of the crisis. The balance of power changed in favor of GNA. So they repushed the strongman of Cyrenaica, Khalifa Haftar, out of Tripolitania. At the same time, the situation changed even at the economical, had the situation with the oil blockade, for example, that stressed Libyan economic system, and which in the country represents about the 90% of income. In addition, the outbreak of coronavirus, for example, was another stress test for the public sector, triggering the rage of the population both in Tripoli and Benghazi. Within this scenario, Europe was not able to take on a coherent, united path toward crisis resolution. Single state move on the crisis to protect and bring on their own interests prevented Europe to develop a common foreign policy. In addition, the two main state actors, Italy and partly France, did not represent a credible partner in the eyes of the Libyan political actors. Despite the situation, not everything was to throw away. Germany, in 2019, represented a real neutral actor. The development of the Berlin process, that was not a single event to take a situational picture, was an attempt to put, was a real attempt to put around on the table all the international actors involved in the crisis in order to find an initial path within the political process. Despite this effort to reach an agreement, or even the start of an agreement, Europe had not the ability as that, for example, of Egypt. Egypt has always sponsored Khalifa Haftar, but at the same time, since August, he was able to shift his sponsorship from Khalifa Haftar to Aqila Saleh. This was very important. This is, it means the relevant role of who is in its hand the control of the situation. So I don't mean, I don't want to say that Egypt is the main actor of within the Libyan crisis, but it was able to handle the actors on the ground. For example, the shift to sponsor Aqila Saleh at the expenses of Khalifa Haftar. But as I said, not everything is to throw away. Europe and its member states has still the capacity to build something. And now the very tracks that is going on in Morocco, Tunisia, for example, the involvement of the neighbor states like Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco was something that, for example, was proposed during Berlin. And this is very important. This is a little overture toward Europe. So the choice of some member states to involve neighbor actors is now, it seems to be something to bet on. So what Europe right now should bring on is, first of all, just to have a common view on Libyan crisis now, because it's I think the best moment to have something and to stop it, to have something new on the base on Berlin process, something new in order to rebuild Libyan institutions and Libyan state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mattia. So Luca Gori will join the discussion later. So I will now like to give the floor to Aurélien Delfiol, the first Secretary Foreign Policy Advisor at the Embassy of France in Rome. We know that within the European Union, there have very often been distant position on support for the peace process in Libya. I understand as an external observer that, however, in the post-Berlin phase, an attempt was made to create a more coherent, common EU position. So France has always been an important player in the Mediterranean and often provide relevant policy impulse in the EU area. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Just to make sure that everyone hears me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I won't be very long, and I first of all I would like to say good morning, buongiorno a tutti. Hello to everyone. Many thanks for first of all to the Festival della Diplomazia for organizing the event with the ECFR Rome. Thank you very much for that. I remember last year's conference just so 1 year ago with the SCOE. It was already a large audience and a success, so thank you very much. Obviously, Libya is a topic that remains on the high on the agenda, so it's a good opportunity. My first point would be to come back briefly on the situation on the ground on the dossier right now. It is positive. It's a first thing. As of October 2020, it is certainly far better than a year ago, and it's something obviously we can rejoice in. We have seen the end of, as it was said by the colleagues relators previously. We've seen the end of major military operations on the ground. It is already a huge progress. It is now stabilized around the front line between Sirte and Joufra, as you know, and in this context, obviously, as many other countries, France fully supports the 5+5 military dialogue in Egypt, in Hurghada, as it was the case, in Geneva. Right now, there are talks. The echoes that we have is that they're rather positive echoes. So it's again something we can definitely rejoice in and support. We also have seen the reprisal of political talks and initiatives. In this again, and indeed many initiatives. It is something France definitely supports, and in primis support to UNSMIL and to the United Nations for its efforts. And as it was said, we can reasonably expect that the political dialogue forum will start. I mean, the kickoff, from what I heard, it would be around November 9th. It is a major date and we'll definitely follow and support all these efforts. This is for the current landscape, briefly. Then what about Europe's role in this landscape? As it is the question asked to everyone now. So, well, first of all, it should be remembered European countries are concerned at a national level. It is something we cannot simply skip. It is something very important. As far as Italy is concerned, it has obviously it has had to face and to cope with and to support huge and unprecedented migratory waves in the course of the last years. Unprecedented. It was a huge challenge for Italian authorities, which have managed well, and it is a major national interest that has to be taken into account when we talk about Europe's role. As far as France is concerned, it has to be remembered, it has to be said that we have been confronted with massive and unprecedented terrorist attacks in France in the course of the last years. I don't have to remember Charlie Hebdo, the Bataclan. It is simply unprecedented in French history in the course of the last 50 years. It has to be remembered because, of course, it informs the role that France is also following in Libya, and our authorities have been very clear that it was part of our action in Libya to make sure that the terrorist threat in Libya, in our immediate vicinity, will not cross the Mediterranean, and that will not be subject again to such attacks. It is also why France is very engaged in the Sahel region, and also because it is linked to the Libyan dossier. There's a continuum, spatially, temporarily, between Sahel and Libya in this respect. And we cannot cope with terrorism in Libya if we don't cope with terrorism in Sahel, because there's translations throughout the desert everywhere. So it has to be taken into account. So this was just to remember the terrible cost that France has to pay to terrorism, just because we assume to be in the front line in this respect. I think that's an important element. At this point, and should need be, I must also stress the fact that France is not involved in Libya for the mere pursuits of its economic interests. I say it just because, I mean, the CEO of our major companies in Italy and in France have said that it is not the case, and there's no rivalry, and even in Europe. So, but even if it's obvious, I think it should be stressed again, just because it's a counterproductive, nasty music, if you allow me, that seems to re-emerge every so often in the media or amongst public opinion. So I think we should really concentrate on what's serious and what matters most. It's a gross misunderstanding of our action in Libya, and way below the point. In this context, France has relentlessly, and I'm coming back to Europe's role, relentlessly strive to uphold the role of Europe in remaining a major player in the resolution of the crisis. Why? Because Libya is in our immediate vicinity, La Sponda Sud, and the potential consequences of the Libyan crisis that the Libyan crisis can have on Europe there's a huge impact on Europe's security. How did it show? Well, very concretely, it shows through the Irini operation on the ground. I mean, it is literally afloat and efficient and working and effective. It has proved in the course of the past year its usefulness and its impartiality towards East and West several times. When we talk about a breach of the oil embargo, for instance, in the East, or breach of the arms embargo because of Turkey as far as the West is concerned, it has shown that it is effective, operational, and useful to the resolution of the conflict. It shows on the ground. It shows also on the political track with the Berlin conference and the Berlin conclusions, whose conclusions we strongly support as France, and which should definitely remain the framework of reference to the resolution of the crisis. And eventually, it shows also with the dynamics we're trying to foster in complement of UNSMIL role and the Berlin conclusions that we're trying to foster at this moment around we're trying to create a dynamics around the neighboring countries of Libya. It is very important to say that it is complementary to and definitely in support of the Berlin conclusions and the efforts of the UNSMIL, but also of the UN Secretary General, who's always been very involved in the resolution of the dossier. Why do you think it's very important? Because they're just, it's an evidence that has to be said. They're the countries first and foremost subject to the consequences of the Libyan dossier, and in this respect, they should be the first countries to be involved in the resolution of the dossier in a constructive way. Also, when we talk about neighboring countries and when we talk about Libya, we should not simply talk about European countries or Arab countries, Arab neighboring countries. We should talk about African neighboring countries. And I think about Niger, I think about Chad, because there's this continuum between Sahel and Libya, which I've talked about, but also because everyone familiar with the Libyan dossier through the years knows that Libya has always played a major role with Africa, has always had a very structured and in-depth relation with Africa. Gaddafi at the time was one of the Arab leaders most closest to the African Union and to African countries. He had this vision of an in-depth politics and in-depth relations with his environment at large, meaning inducing not only Europe, which is very important, not only the Arab League or our Arab neighboring countries, which are very important, but also neighboring African countries. So, in brief, these are the major points I wanted to evoke. I wanted to stress in the course of this very useful conference that ECFR and the Festival de la Diplomatie have launched again this year. And I thank you again very much for that.
Thank you, Aurelian. In the meantime, I have the pleasure of giving you the news that it seems that a stable agreement was being found in Geneva on a ceasefire, on a permanent ceasefire. And so let's add another positive note to what you said, Aurelian. So thank you very much for your contribution. So we can go to my friend Federica Saini Fasanotti. I would now like to introduce the topic of the United States. We know how the possible change of the US presidency can be relevant for all crisis scenarios, and especially the Libyan crisis. So Federica could introduce some scenarios, both on American foreign policy towards Libya, but also you can speak about the hypothesis of sending a military contingent, because it's a theoretical hypothesis, but which has also recently been advanced by some analysts, and you are an expert on military affairs. So Federica, Federica is senior policy fellow at the Brookings Institution. So Federica, you have the floor.
Thank you, Arturo. Thank you for this invitation. And I think that now we are going to do a little bit of Fanta politics in the sense that we are trying to see the future. Let's say that it depends on, of course, the next election. So who will be elected as a new president of the United States? So this is the big question. So now we are going on if. We have two chances. One is Trump and the other one is Biden. If Trump will be re-elected, of course, nothing will change at all in the United States politics about Libya. So we know that the last 4 years have been almost nothing about Libya from the United States. I mean, no strategy at all. Libya is not an important file for Washington. There is someone talking.
So please,
Okay.
please
Someone-
mute your phone.
Okay.
Not yours.
No, I know. Okay.
Please.
And so during these last 4 years, Trump has been very clear he has clarified the situation since do you remember the first meeting with our former Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni in April 2017, when Trump said that the United States has no interest at all in the Libyan file except for terrorism. And from that moment on, we have had many tactical operations in Libya from the United States, many. And I just can recall, operations in 2017, immediately after the election of Trump, operation in September 2019, all against jihadi cells, so terroristic cells. We had a little bigger operation in terms of tactical action. That was the campaign against ISIS in Sirte in 2016. That was, some more articulated from the operation from the United States. But I mean, Trump and this actual administration is not interested at all in the Libya file. And so it has been always clear that Europe has to work pretty alone regarding Libya. So there is no American strategy. Although in the last few months, the situation has a little bit changed. So let's say that we have had some improvements. If we, for example, improvements if we think at the beginning of the siege of Tripoli 1.5 years, when Trump immediately called Haftar to congratulate with him, for the good action of the war, of starting the civil war. That was crazy. And in that sense, we saw, a double way of action. So one was from the White House, and the second was from the technicians, from the Pentagon and from the State Department. So I think, and I have analyzed the situation with Trump, just to make you understand that if Trump will be reelected, I think that the situation won't change so much. If Biden, let's say that even in this with a new president, I think that there will be little change about Libya, and so Europe will be forced to act again alone in many respects. Something will change probably in better for Europe if Biden will be elected, meaning we have to think that Biden has been the vice president of the United States for a double mandate. So he has a huge experience in terms of foreign policy. And then we have to remember that Biden has always been the chair of the Senate for foreign in the Foreign Relations Committee twice. So he is a man of empathy, a man of huge foreign relation culture. So I think that he will be better than Trump in many respects. I think that one of the first things that he will do if he enters in the Oval Office will be reopening all the ties and the old very good relationship with Europe. So this will be a good point for us. But if we think as European that the United States with the Biden presidency will change completely the approach towards Libya, we are wrong. So we must think that as for Europe, we have to be more proactive. We have been too much reactive in the last almost 10 years. And this is a very core point, a key point here. Europe must be proactive for the first time in its history about the last 9 years. It has been too proactive, probably, during the revolution in 2011, and then it stopped. We have to rethink our strategy, I think, frankly, because when we will have the new president in the United States, and many of us hope that it will be Biden for many reasons, the new president will have, and if even the old one, will have 4 major problems to look at. And it won't be Libya. It will be the pandemic, COVID. It will be, of course, something very connected to pandemic, which is economy. And he will have not only economy, but what economy has created, has opened in many respects in the United States, which is the old wound of the United States since the time of the constitutions, the racial problem, and then climate change. So these 4 huge macro problems for the next president of the United States will make foreign policy in many respects different. And in foreign policy, the problem for the United States won't be Libya. It will be Iran, it will be Russia, it will be China first. And so we have to rethink, I really think, our vision and our strategy regarding Libya. And I can stop here.
Thank you, Federica. So your message is EU, wake up.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so thank you very much. Before
this is Michael Shaffer.
Yes, Michael.
I hate to interrupt, but I think her message also is America wake up as well. I think that's what I got out of this.
Yes, okay? But there is no chance for the Americans. This is the message of
Michael, I so hope. I mean, you are so important for us. So yeah, let's hope.
That's the message I got from you. I pray. Over to you, please.
Yeah.
So before opening the question and answer to our participants and public, I would like to ask you the speaker some question. The first is for Mattia. Mattia, you talk about Egypt, but I think that there are some North African neighborhood country of Libyan neighborhood country that are very involved in the crisis, and so they could have a role in the crisis management. So, what do you think about this? And the second question is for Aurelien. You talk about the crisis and the transposition, etc. I would like to have your vision a little bit deeper on the relation with Turkey, and especially on the Libyan crisis. So how to manage this complex relation between NATO and one member of the NATO, that is Turkey, especially in the East Med, but also in Libya. And the last question is for Michael. So Michael, some EU policymaker, I think, can endorse, for example, the proposal. There are a lot of proposals in the economic field. One of these is the proposal of a temporary hosting the hydrocarbons revenues in a European bank account to prevent criticism from the House of Representatives, because both rivals in East and West will trust a European financial institution. And this solution will give time to eventually establish a joint commission to control energy production and agree on a fair distribution of the revenue. So what do you think about this? So three questions for us. I don't know if Mattia can start.
Yeah, thank you, Arturo, for the question. And first of all, I want to say, after the revolutions in 2011, we discovered the geopolitics of the Middle East. So we discovered Saudi Arabia has a role, Iran has a role, Qatar, Turkey, and partly other powers like Egypt as well. Yes, the neighbor countries has a role, and as they had previously, because we used to say Middle East something always oppressed by the West, Americans, Russians, Europeans, but at the same time we have to understand that there are forces within the region that are very important. So beside the big powers in the region, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Egypt, that have a role in the country, within the Libyan crisis, I think also countries like Tunisia, Morocco, and as well as Algeria have a big role in the crisis. Berlin process, Italy, for example, proposed the involvement of these powers, and all the European countries agreed on this position, because everyone knows that Tunisia, for example, and its border, Algeria as well, have huge interests in terms of security, but even economy. For example, just we think about Tunisia, that time ago, a lot of Tunisians went to Libya to work. A lot of Libyans went to Tunisia for the hospitals, for example. So we have this kind of interest. We have also interest in terms of economic as well. So as for Algeria, okay, Algeria right now is a transition period, so we have not a stable country in terms of government, because we still have protests, we still have mobilization, partly likely because we know that what happened in 2011 should be a lesson for the masses and for the population as well, and for regimes as well. So Algeria right now has this situation, but at the same time a really huge role for Libya, especially for the south of Algeria in terms of security. Morocco, that got this role, this important role, with the aim of to unify the political forces in Libya and just to have a dialogue between East and West. And it seems, without expressing big enthusiasm, but just a little bit of positivism, just optimistic view, that could be successful. So I think they can have a role in terms of diplomacy, and even in terms of to have a different view from the Western one on stability, democracy, and transition of the country. So I think they have a big role and importance within the region, within the Libyan crisis, and maybe was the best choice to involve them in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mattia. Aurelian, if you want. We can't hear you. Are you online?
I'm sorry, who is supposed to speak now? I don't see microphones on.
Okay. So we can go to
Do you hear me?
Michael. Ecco. Yes,
Really sorry
yes, we
for
can.
that.
Yes, we
My
can.
fault. I had deactivated the microphone.
No problem.
Arturo, you wanted me to intervene on to concentrate on Turkey, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just it's very important, of course. you're definitely right. Just very briefly to say that we're very much talking about the confrontation of late between France and Turkey, and we definitely have to address this issue and to explain things. The starting point is the trend. What is the trend? The trend is that we've seen in the course of the past years Turkey assuming more and more imperialistic ambitions in the region. What we say the surge or the re-emerging of the Ottoman Empire. That's the trend overall. It shows, especially we could talk about other regions in the world where it shows, but it shows especially well, of course, at the core in the Eastern Mediterranean, because it is at the core of its historical zone of influence, of course. It shows on Syria first, whenever it is trying to secure continuously leverage on the migration factor, the so-called pull-out factor. It shows in the confronts of Greece, and this is at the core of the topic, of course. Everyone, I think, and also all the giovani which are following us right now can see almost every day now in the news of new development on this topic. It is sending its Eurocrace seismic prospection vessel, but surrounded clearly by 4 or 5 vessels, heavily armed vessels, as provocations, clear provocations towards Greece. And Greece is as it is the evidence, an important EU member state and an EU partner, which we have to definitely support against this type of aggression. We, as we said it, and the European Council at 27 has said it several times, we support first and foremost political dialogue and the Pacific issue to the problems at stake. But what we see from Turkey is not a willingness to take the hand that we are sending. So we have to be keep very aware, and also we're becoming to be a bit weary about these provocations towards Greece. And then it shows eventually in Libya, as it is trying to, as it has benefited from the offensive from Haftar at the doors of Tripoli at the moment when the GNA, internationally supported by the United Nations, the international community, was in a very desperate position. Turkey benefited from this position to secure agreements on the security level, on the delimitation of maritime respective zones, etc., which are very important and which procure Turkey with the leverage that is at the moment unmatched in Libya. I mean, Turkey is definitely the power which has succeeded in securing the major presence and influence now in Libya, which we have to take into account, and which is making it slightly more difficult to proceed and to go onward with the resolution of the crisis. But what we have to keep in mind, and it's my last remark, Arturo, is that for Turkey, at the end of the day, Libya is but only one piece of the whole puzzle that I've tried to expose. I mean, it is one piece of its assumed strategy of trying to rebuild for internal political interests this dream of an Ottoman Empire. Having stated that, what's very important for us is to, having that in mind, is to collectively continue and strive and go onwards with our collective efforts, especially between European members, to secure a balanced way to deal with these ambitions and to impede Turkey from pursuing this unrealistic and counterproductive dream in the Mediterranean.
Thank you very much for your clarification. So, Michael, my question is about the European bank account and the Libyan revenue. So, is a fantasy or is it possible solution? Is it policy? Michael, can you? Okay.
I'm now unmuted now. Okay, sorry about that. I've learned lessons from the various communications on Zoom, WhatsApp, WebEx, block everything and then unrelease everything. I'd like to thank you for giving me the easiest question here, which is really complex. Okay, first of all, let me go back to certain things. We're submitting to you three things: the recent economic update, a Libyan economic analysis, a much longer document, and also a Libya mapping exercise, a donor mapping exercise that will be distributed to all of you. And I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas from the World Bank. If you like a lot of reading, we can provide you a lot of reading for yourselves. That'll give you like a quick snapshot of the economic stuff of Libya, and I think will help you in other discussions as you go forward. Now, on this oil revenue and escrow account that's being discussed here, I'm not going to go into some of the other discussions there because there have been other discussions on the sideline. But let's go back to what is it? If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat history. Okay, so let me give you three examples of where this has kind of been tried, and maybe the people here in this room can see kind of the complexities with doing something like this. Iraq, okay, oil for food program in 1992. It wasn't a blistering success. So if you're reading about this in the newspapers about the escrow accounts and bank account like this, then you have to go back to potentially looking at Iraq in 1992, 1994, which is an oil for food program. Lebanon, 1988, 1992, with what is called a bifurcated, separated central bank. The central bank had the only credibility in the country because there was no political organization that did. And the central bank governor had basically moral authority. He was literally living in the office in Lebanon, creating both fiscal and monetary policy for Lebanon. This is an issue also in Libya, but the central bank governor in Libya doesn't really have the broad moral authority that the governor in Lebanon did in 1998 and 1992, or something like that. The last example that I'm going to ask maybe for you guys to look at some point in time before I get to that kind of consideration is Liberia, okay? So now you have three historical examples. In Liberia, what happened was that an international monitor was assigned to the Liberians to actually sign, approve, as a controller, all spending on development spending for at least a period of time to look at all the money and to ensure that the money was spent for development was going to the right place. So there are three areas, or three different examples, of three different variations of how the international community actually looked at and controlled expenditures and or revenue side, okay? And I encourage you to look at that when those three examples, when you go back and look at the newspaper. Now, what's being discussed here is basically, I mean, I'm not getting into other details, but what you see in the press, but what's being discussed is a broad escrow account where national oil revenues are going to be put into a national escrow account and things like this too. Now, I go back to, I think Ms. Frederica from Brookings would remember this quote: "If you break it, you bought it." Okay, Colin Powell in the Iraq example, and you bring that up, that's also history repeating itself. Once you actually have international dominance of an escrow account that's being discussed, whether it be in a European bank, which I don't think that's possible, or the Libyan Foreign Bank, okay, which is the primary bank for the oil company, okay, I think it creates a lot of issues. First of all, let's be clear, oil contracts going through from the national oil company of Libya are required to submit their funding to the Libyan Foreign Bank, okay? That's all the contractual arrangements. So all of that's got to be changed, okay? And by Libyan law, okay, what's required is the funding for the national oil company has to be swept back into the central bank. Why? It's Libyan law, and also the Central Bank of Libya owns the Libyan Foreign Bank. okay? So effectively, you have to be very careful in how you structure some sort of escrow account facility, okay? Now, if the international community or some European bank takes over that, who absorbs the moral risk, the moral hazard risk, and who absorbs the reputational risk? There's a huge risk involved there. So if, for example, some money is, like, how is revenue going to be distributed? We've heard discussions about, revenue be distributed equally among certain groups in South, East, West, North. But how do you know that the revenue is going to be distributed equally and fairly? How, and if it isn't, who's responsible for the fact that the revenue wasn't distributed equally and fairly? And, I think to put an escrow account around Libyan national oil company revenues is going to require a UN sanctions committee oversight. There's no doubt, okay? Absolutely no doubt that's going to require it, because no country will go in without it. I don't think the Europeans have it. I think it requires UN sanctions, okay? But let's look what's under sanctions. The Libyan Investment Authority with 68 billion in revenue in total assets, both fixed assets, real estate assets around the world, plus about 30 billion in equity and bond assets are in escrow account now. They're generating close to, I think, 3 billion a year or 2 billion a year in recurrent revenue, okay? The money can't move. There's a question about distribution of dividends, but it's a very difficult situation to unlock that from an escrow account situation. So the question is, it's a very complex situation to take the international community and put it into an escrow account facility, because it requires UN sanctions committee review and potentially what is called smart sanctions, okay? But smart sanctions is sort of like an oxymoron. You have to really think about how these sanctions are going to work and how they're going to be distributed. And then once these sanctions are put in place, if that's the case, for an escrow account, how do you grandfather them out, okay? Now, the Libyan Investment Authority has been under sanctions since 2012, okay? And Mr. Mohammed keeps going back to the sanctions committee from the LIA, asking to be removed from the sanctions, okay? He wants to manage the money and all this kind of stuff. But that hasn't been done. So the question is, how do you do it appropriately for the benefit of the Libyan people? How do you ensure that whatever revenues are there and some sort of agreement of how they're distributed is going to be distributed equitably and reasonably, okay? And then who to absorb the risk if potentially, some of the project money or whatever is said, we're going to spend for a river here. Who ensures the risk of if the money isn't spent in that project? Is it the government of France? Is it the UN? Whatever. The Iraq Oil for Food program, okay, is a clear example of some of the risks that are going to be there, okay? So I encourage everybody there. I think there's 120 people. I don't know how many there. Hello to everybody. But encourage you to look back on some of the historical examples. And then if you go back in Iraq, Lebanon, Liberia, and then you yourselves come up and say, well, how can this be structured effectively? Because that's what's being discussed in many arenas around the world at this point, under the Libyan Berlin process and others. So it's a very complex thing. And it really is difficult to implement as well as unwind going forward. But over to you, please. And I encourage you to read the 3 documents that are being sent to you. I mean, I don't think a lot of people have a lot of things to do during the 40 hours that they're watching videos or watching WhatsApp. So you might find that of interest. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Michael. Your intervention is very clear. So I think that Luca Gori is now with us. Luca, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Now let's talk about Italy and how our country has moved in support of the negotiation in Libya. Luca Gori has been following the Libyan question for several years and knows very well how Libya is one of the main chapters of the Italian foreign policy, if not the most important. Luca Gori is Principal Director for the Mediterranean and Middle East at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. So Luca, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Arturo, and sorry again for joining so late the discussion. But I think it was very important to add the Italian voice to this discussion. First of all, I'm sure you have already touched upon the news coming from Geneva and the ceasefire that they have achieved in Geneva in the 5+5 committee. This is really good news. It's a very positive development, and I would say also that it sets the stage also for the next crucial step, which is the intra-Libyan political dialogue that is going to take place next week in Tunis. So this development, of course, we have to be cautious, because we all know that Libya is Libya, and today you make a step forward, and tomorrow you risk to end up in a completely different scenario. But it means that at least diplomacy can work also in Libya. The toolbox provided by the international community can give a contribution to the stabilization of the country, and this is the first lesson that we can learn from Geneva. The second lesson, I think, is that there is now in Libya a genuine will for peace and stability. They want to end the conflict. The Libyans want to end the conflict. Third point, there is also, I would say, a new will to regain the sovereignty of the country. The Libyans want to keep the country away from the international, regional, international interferences. They want to keep the country united, and they want to reject all the interferences. And finally, they do not want a military regime. They want to build up a different institutional framework for their country. So these are the first, I would say, feelings coming with the Geneva agreement. With regard to Italy, we had yesterday here in Rome Serraj. We had 2 days ago Bashaga. We had also Siala. So we had in the last 2 days very important meetings in Italy that were conducive also to the agreement achieved in Geneva. Serraj met with the Prime Minister Conte, with the Minister Di Maio, the same for Bashaga and Siala. And I mean, we were able to discuss in depth all the issues related not only to the ceasefire, which is one of the main objectives also of the Italian foreign policy vis-à-vis Libya, but also other two very important objectives. The first, of course, is the full resuming of oil production throughout the country. Also in this respect, we have seen several progresses in the last weeks, but there is still a long way to go. So we have to continue to press in that direction. And finally, of course, the new political and institutional architecture of the country, which is, of course, the objective of the intra-Libyan political dialogue. But we, as international community, we have to insist with all the different Libyan parties to encourage them to be constructive in Tunis. So at the same time, we have relaunched the bilateral cooperation with Libya, not only politically, but also on the economic field. We have established a bilateral committee, which will be working in the next weeks, trying to identify all the projects, the old projects and the new projects that we are going to have with Libya in the coming months. We have relaunched also the military cooperation with Libya. Our Minister of Defense went to Libya. We are contributing to the demining of especially the south of Tripoli, but we have an extensive program of cooperation in many different fields concerning the defense capabilities. And finally, of course, the migration issue, which is still a very important subject. And also in this respect, we will continue to reinforce our bilateral cooperation. But all in all, I would say that we are really at a critical juncture with regard to Libya. We have been in this moment even before in different situations. Now it's very critical because every time that you approach the possibility to find a solution, you know that there are different actors and different forces which will try to spoil what you are doing. So now we have to be really united as international community behind UNSMIL, behind the United Nations, in order, on the one side, to push the Libyans to implement the agreement achieved today in Geneva, and on the other side, to find a political solution in Tunis in the next weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you so much for these fresh insights. So I don't know if you can stay with us, and I don't know if the other speaker want to intervene. If not, I think we still have 10 minutes, around 10-15 minutes to take a couple of questions.
Unfortunately, I have to leave.
Okay. Grazie. Grazie, Luca.
Grazie. Ciao, ciao.
If there are some questions, we are able now to take this question. So please let me know.
Yes, Mr. Valvelli, you can see on the side in the list of participants, those who have questions are raising a hand.
No, I think that there are no questions, I think.
I see Mr. Giovanni D'Agostino and Marinali Davide. You should see them on the side with a blue hand close to their name.
Okay. So no, please, they can.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Giovanni D'Agostino. I'm a global governance student from the second year from Italy. And my question is, Dr. Shaffer mentioned the domestic debt in Libya and the difficulty in making structural reforms in such a volatile environment. According to a policy research paper published on the World Bank website in 2015, 5 years ago, might be a little outdated, but the elimination of food subsidies would have the equivalent of a 2%, would decrease the equivalent of a 2% of the government budget, which currently is at 144% of the gross domestic product. However, these reforms, when it comes to subsidies in Libya, would double the poverty rate of the average household in Libya. So this begs the question, what are the first steps needed to design an effective economic plan that will allow to implement necessary reforms without damaging the economic status of the average Libyan citizen? And to add to that, what role is the current health emergency playing in slowing down this process? So my question is, of course, for Dr. Shaffer, but can be answered by any panelist. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And there is the question by Davide Marinali.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you very much for this very beautiful conversation. For me, it was very, very interesting. I'm Davide Marinali, Global Governance second year from Italy. My question is not as specific as the one of Giovanni, is more general because I think we touched a lot of topic and some of these were a bit like complex and maybe I'm not able to do a question of this topic, but I would like to question a very general topic about the intervention of EU and the intervention of the United States. We talk about the election of the United States and the idea that we have to wait the United States and wait their movement to do something in Libya. I don't know. I don't see, like, in my opinion, this is a very good policy. I don't want to be like provocative, but I would like to understand better. I remember 1 year ago, the president of France, Macron, talk about NATO as brain death. Is not wrong. We see that all the European countries are not active. The Europe is divided. We see that the country of the north of Europe and the Visegrad group, if I'm right, they are not very interested to have a very strong foreigners politics in this area. We see a country like Turkey that is part of the NATO is also very near to the European Union, or at least it used to be very near to the European Union, that do more or less whatever they want. They are very active in the, and we talk about an imperialistic Turkey. We see Turkey, I have just read the news some minutes ago, that now has a lot of power in Libya, and they control the Coast Guard in Libya. This institution is paid also from Italy and also from Europe. So my point is this: we have really to wait the United States. We have really to wait the slow Europe to do something in Libya, or maybe we have to do something very fast, at least as soon as possible. Also, if the United States are not agree, also if the European Union is not agree, I think that this slowness is a damage. Since 2011, we only waited and we only give the money, but we still have a country that is not stable near home. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I think that the two intervention, the two questions are for Michael and sure for Federica, but I think also for Aurelien. Michael, if you start.
Arturo.
Okay.
I'm really sorry it's just because I'll have to leave soon. I'm really sorry for that. I would have loved. As I assume Michael's answer will have to be more developed. It's very precise, etc. Maybe I might just intervene on NATO.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind. Very briefly, thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Davide. I've talked about Turkey, about ambitions, imperialistic ambitions, etc. I'm not coming back to that. I hope it was clear enough. When the President Macron talked about cerebral death of NATO, was obviously to be taken not in the first sense. It was deliberately made as a wake-up call, and the terms were brokered for communication to be really aware of the challenges which NATO are facing. France is a founding member of NATO. It is very much involved in NATO in terms of finances, in terms of operation, etc. It will continue to do so. It is not what is at stake. What is at stake is, with the many challenges that we have increasingly to face as European Union members at our doors, and especially in the Mediterranean, we also have, and it was the sense and the objective of the formula, we have to, on the one hand, reform NATO so as it is better able to cope with the new challenges we're facing now. They're not obviously the same challenges that were at the creation of NATO in 1949. So it's just meant to adapt and to reform, and at the same time we have to complement NATO. where it cannot or not in time adopt and reform, the European Union has to increase its effort to be a major international player, also on security, on international relations, on defense, etc. We have to build more sovereignty for our defense industry, for our security policy, etc., etc. This is the way. It's not exclusive. It's not either NATO or EU. It's NATO reformed and EU stronger.
Thank you. Grazie. Federica? Grazie, grazie mille, a presto allora.
Ciao Arturo, un caro saluto a tutti i giovani.
Ciao,
ciao, buona domenica. Ciao ciao.
Okay, well, I hope I have been clear when I was talking earlier, meaning I have never said that Europe is waiting for United States. On the contrary, I said we must have a proactive strategy and not be reactive as we have ever been, until today. So I think that the United States will have their priorities, and it's not Libya at all. So given the fact that for France, for Italy, and for many nations, watching the Mediterranean, Libya is fundamental. I think we should be, more proactive and create a real strategy. One of the problems that I can see until now in the last almost 10 years is that, and I know that Arturo is with me in this idea, the, let's say, calling international community until now has always been like, okay, we have to talk with the Libyan leadership. But the point is that the Libyan leadership is not really recognized on the ground. So what the Italian government, the French government, like we have listened to Luca Gori right now, is doing is very good, is absolutely, I cannot say anything bad about it. But the problem is that one thing is the political, let's say, leadership in Libya. And one another thing is the Libyan population. So I think that all these movements, even in these days, about the political process in Libya are, of course, a very good news, but I'm not so positive because why? And this is, Luca Gori said, the situation in Libya can always change. That's exactly because in Libya, we have two different actors. One is the leadership, and usually the international community uses to work with them. And the other one is the population, meaning above all, militias, and the leaders of the militias. And so I think, and that was, I realized, Arturo, that I did not answer to your second question to me about the European contingent, military contingent, and so on. And that's why, in my opinion, a contingent of military contingent of control, and deterrence in Libya would be so important, and not European at all. I mean, Europeans have to stay distant and far away from Libya in this way, for historical reasons, for political reasons, whatever. So I don't think it should be European. I invite everybody to go and read at the Brookings site a report signed also by Arturo at the end of 2018 that we wrote for the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. And it was, a bunch of analysts from all over the world specialized in Libya. And more than 2 years ago at this point, we suggested a military contingent in order to control the terrain in every possible way, disarming, security, social, whatever. So I think that we are still, I'm not so positive, we are still very far away from stability and a peaceful resolution in Libya. And I'm waiting for some action from Haftar, by the way. And I answered, I guess.
Thank you, Federica. I think we now can close this meeting, this webinar, and let me say thanks to all the participants and in particular to all the speakers. And so we see the next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone, and thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.